right, good afternoon to everyone joining our session this afternoon, and thank you for joining our presentation today on mass casualty triage and scene management. My name is Kevin Riley, and I'm the Regional Training Coordinator for the Metropolitan Area Regional Office based out of Stony Brook University Hospital. We're going to focus our panel discussion today on the challenges and best practices of MCI triage and scene management, the importance of which keeps getting shown to us time and again on the news, just as it did in Buffalo over this past weekend. For those of you who may not yet be aware, we had to recently change our topic and speaker lineup for today due to a scheduling conflict, but I think we have a very excellent presentation lined up for you all today. As we've seen recently, first responders and hospitals are continuously having to deal with sudden acts of mass violence and the need to treat combat-like injuries. And this sad reality, or the sad reality of this is that the frequency of intentional mass casualty incidents seem to be steadily increasing. And even though the tactics, techniques, and procedures used to counter the threats and treat victims are getting better and better, and the dedication of responders keeps trying to keep pace, there's naturally a lag time between noticing an uptick in violence and being able to field greater response capabilities. And this lag time sometimes uncovers critical capability gaps in the field. So our goal today is to put some of these capabilities under the microscope, to take a closer look at some of the skills necessary to respond to one of these incidents and to better treat a large number of victims of an intentional mass casualty incident. I should say that this is not going to be a training or certification class. Let me also say that I profess to neither be an expert in triage nor an expert in scene management. My role today was merely to bring people together to have a casual discussion on a topic that is anything but casual. Just some administrative housekeeping items. If you'd like your attendance recorded for this session, please join with your full name so that your attendance can be properly recorded. I'll ask attendees to please, for now, remain on mute with your videos turned off. Please keep monitoring the chat, and you can also use the chat to communicate with panelists and the hosts. You can use the raise hand function during the question and answer period, and we'll unmute you so you can have your questions answered. And a certificate of attendance will be available for those who need it upon completion of the post-session evaluation in the learning management system. So we are extremely fortunate today to have with us Staff Lieutenant Jim Edson, a career paramedic and the training officer for the Farmington Hills, Michigan Fire Department, as well as the Emergency Medical Services Coordinator for the Oakland County Tactical Training Consortium. He is also the founder of the International Tactical EMS Association, and he served as a Navy corpsman during Operation Desert Storm. In the immediate aftermath of the infamous North Hollywood Bank of America takeover, robbery, and shootout in 1997, many of you may remember that, and a full 2 years prior to the tragedy at Columbine, Lieutenant Edson was the first in the United States to conceptualize what is now known as warm zone care and casualty management. He's been studying, practicing, and teaching active violence response and tactical medicine for 38 years, and is considered a subject matter expert on these events and how to best mitigate them tactically and medically. So welcome to you, Jim, and hope all is well out in Michigan.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Also joining us today is Deputy Chief Bernie Meehan of the Danbury, Connecticut Fire Department. Chief Meehan is a 45-year career, has a 45-year career in emergency services, and is a 38-year paramedic and has 37 years in the fire service. He has served as an EMS chief, emergency management director, and county fire coordinator, and he's also been an active volunteer for most of his life. Chief Meehan is well known in the state of Connecticut, having responded to countless serious, high-profile calls, including responses to the Bridgeport building collapse, which sadly killed 28 people, and as one of the first paramedics to enter the Sandy Hook Elementary School, where 26 people lost their lives to a lone gunman. Chief Meehan was among the first in Connecticut to become certified in critical incident stress debriefing, and has subsequently become a founding member of the Connecticut Critical Incident Stress Debriefing Team. And his fellow responders have benefited greatly from his being involved in hundreds of debriefings and peer helping activities. So welcome again to the panel, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and experiences with us today.
Well, thanks to everyone for joining us.
All righty. So I'd like to start by going right into a slide that just shows a very basic scene management setup. And I'm going to just mention a few discussion points, and then I'm going to ask each one of you to weigh in with your own thoughts, your own philosophies, your own discussion points. This is just a really rough layout of perhaps what an intentional mass casualty scene might look like. It is by no means to scale, I should say that. And these are the points of interest at most of these kinds of scenes. So you have an incident command post, you have, of course, you're gonna have a staging area. The crisis site could be indoors, could be outdoors. Likewise, our casualty collection point could be indoors, could be outdoors. Then we'll need a casualty exchange point where victims would be loaded on to an ambulance and then sent to a hospital. I think most responders should understand or try to understand that the importance of dispatch, I think, can't be overstated. Dispatch is going to be likely giving out information on the location of staging areas and command posts. So anyone responding to scenes should really listen up to those initial radio calls, which will get everyone on the same page. Law enforcement should designate the locations of a staging area and an incident command post, but fire and EMS can take the initiative to set these up as well if law enforcement happens to be busy and may have overlooked these steps. I think most would agree that fire and EMS have a lot more experience with setting up staging and incident command posts, so they're probably more proficient at it anyway. So I know if I'm a law enforcement incident commander, I'd be more than happy to have fire EMS step in to help out in those regards. These locations, of course, need to be secure locations. But if these locations are in a different zip code, then that would probably slow down or even impede the response. So proximity is very important. I would also add that in my opinion, these locations shouldn't be co-located, but they do need to be close enough that coordination can still take place among and between them. And that coordination should be possible even if you don't have radios or there's too much frequency congestion. They have to be relatively close. I'll stop right there just to ask you gentlemen to jump right in if you have any thoughts so far on our scene setup.
Bernie, after you.
Okay, I'll take the bait. I would say that any successful incident, you really have to start at the command post. You know, if your first few people on the scene are going to set the pace. So, you know, as much as people say, you know, panic is contagious, calm is contagious as well, or coordination and organization. So if the first few people there, maybe not the tactical guys, but command level people or first few officers or in law enforcement, I think, and Jim, help me out here. I think it's the fifth man. Is that their concept?
That's one version of it. Yeah.
Right. I'm not a cop. So if the first few people that have some kind of command experience start to set the stage and establish a command post, and if that, especially the fire guy, fire service is the subject matter expert in incident command. Any incident, regardless if it's a county fair, a fire, active shooter, whatever, if you follow the incident command system, you have a much more likelihood that it'll be successful. And I was recently at a search for a trooper we lost here in Connecticut. I was the coordinator. I was there very early on, and I'm pretty stubborn, I guess is the proper term, about setting up a command post. And the fire chief in this town, this small town, she's very good. And I insisted with the law enforcement, this is the Connecticut State Police, that we have a combined command post. And it worked really well. We had everybody at that command. I had the command board set up, and we had people from federal agencies, state agencies, TAC teams, ESU, everybody. And it works well because you have to be able to fan out that communications. And Kevin, you said yourself, it's tough to get bandwidth or communications. Michigan maybe has a statewide system with trunking systems. Connecticut has one, but not everybody's on it. So it's tough to get everybody on the same channel and this interoperability dream that we all have. But I think to at least start the conversation, and I'll throw it over to Jim. I think the command post is crucial to set the pace. All the other pieces can operate maybe well, maybe not so well, but if there's not somebody coordinating everybody's efforts, you're deemed to fail. Jim.
I couldn't agree with you more, Bernie. And one thing I want to mention is that I do a lot of teaching for the National Tactical Officers Association and some other organizations. So this perspective I'm going to give you is not just a Michigan perspective. It's some of the messaging that we're pushing out nationally and even beyond. But I think Bernie hit on a critical point, and I think that we call it hasty, co-located, unified command. The sooner you can achieve that, the sooner those initial commanders, which might be a sergeant from the law enforcement agency and a company officer or a shift commander from the fire department, can literally stand shoulder to shoulder, share intel in real time, and each start moving their pieces on the proverbial board to solve the problem, which is typically half the problem is tactical and half the problem is medical. So when people ask me, Jim, there's a lot of information out there, give me 3 things that you think are absolutely critical for getting an incident like this off on the right footing. What Bernie said is absolutely number one. It's that hasty, co-located, unified command as soon as possible. Not only outside, but also inside as soon as it's achievable. So as soon as the line is drawn between the hot zone and the warm zone, we'd love to replicate that unified command outside on the inside. Because I often say that anyone who thinks they can run the exterior and the interior of one of these complex incidents from the exterior is delusional. So we want bosses outside, we want bosses inside. That's number one. Number 2 is the establishment of a perimeter, not only by law enforcement, but I say by the fire department as well too, because we're very good about flocking to the front side of the problem, whether it be the alpha side or the 1 side, depending on which discipline we're talking about. But we're not quite sure what's going on the other 3 sides. And at the theater in Aurora, Colorado, back in 2012, there were a number of critical casualties to the rear of the theater that initially went unaddressed, and it resulted in many of them being transported to trauma centers by patrol vehicles. And those Aurora police officers would be the first ones to say they didn't want to do it. It's just they were the only ones that were standing around in a position to solve that problem. Casualty collection points. I mean, many of us in emergency services are type A personalities, and we'd like to think that when we show up, we're going to bring calm to the chaos, and we want us to set up a casualty collection point here, and we want to set up a casualty collection point there. Oftentimes, the reality is those casualty collection points are sometimes established by the victims and the bystanders before we even arrive. And we have to build upon that and not necessarily relocate them. So if we can put, theoretically, an engine company on the other 3 sides of the problem with a company officer or a supervisor on each one of those pieces of apparatus, now the incident commander has accomplished a 360-degree survey by committee. They've got a boss on each side, and oftentimes those might be mutual aid companies because there's not a lot of departments out there that might have the resources to do all that on their own. So, but now we've got eyes and ears on all four sides of the building that can get us that initial casualty count as far as the casualties that are outside. We'll deal with the ones inside as soon as, we're able to do so. So, so again, the hasty unified command outside and inside, I think, is number one. Number two, the establishment of a perimeter by law enforcement and the fire service to establish that containment by both per se. And then the third thing that I mentioned is that there are 4 different types of warm zone care out there, which I'm sure we'll get into later on. I would argue that Rescue Task Force is actually the last of the 4. And the law enforcement rescue or extraction teams comprised of law enforcement officers is often the first. So what I say to people is embrace law enforcement rescue. Don't resist it, as long as law enforcement officers have the resources to pull that off. Because I did some extensive research on this, and I found that 75% of the casualties within the inner perimeter that were incapable of removing themselves were removed by law enforcement.
I think we saw that out in Aurora. I know Chad Lanigan, who commanded the scene, had 126 officers on scene, and it was largely a law enforcement extraction. So I think that echoes to a lot of what you're both talking about.
Every victim that came out of the theater was removed by law enforcement officers. The same could be said for Pulse. The same could be said for Norris Hall at Virginia Tech. And incident after incident after incident. We certainly want to get to the point where we can get fire and EMS in there sooner than we currently are,
right.
but we're just not there yet, with the exception of a few select agencies.
Heavily dependent on resources and heavily dependent on time, the time needed to get people out, get them to the hospital. Bernie, what were you going to say?
I completely agree with everything Jim said. The issue really, and you were just alluding to it, Kevin, is time and resources. We have a major shortage of EMS people in this country and the rest of the world probably as well. So you have to dance with the one you brought. So if law enforcement floods the scene and they're going to drag people out, it gives us some time to put EMS people or fire people in a casualty collection area and to start to work on getting these EMS resources, because they just really, at least here in Connecticut, they barely exist day to day, let alone if we called and said, I got 30 victims that need attention, it would almost be insurmountable. The perimeter thing, completely agree. And you have to think outside the box. I went to one not long ago at a university in my jurisdiction, reported shooter, and I had the 3rd or 4th due fire truck block the road to the university. There's your perimeter. Firemen aren't trained to secure perimeters, but we can block a road, So again, the cross training and understanding of each discipline makes a tremendous difference. And if you get the time, as Jim said, he does a lot of training with multi-jurisdictional disciplines. That's what you have to do. We get our fire guys into the fire school building with law enforcement with long guns and so forth. It's outside their comfort zone. But guys, this is what you're going to wind up doing. What the Sandy Hook thing you talked about, it occurred organically. We didn't say, hey, let's form a rescue task force. The 3 of us hooked up with a couple of troopers when we were in the building. So right on with what Jim said.
Right. So you both talk about the hasty establishment of command and maybe the hasty establishment of staging. I think we're all in agreement that both of those locations need a multidiscipline staffing. So you need fire, EMS, and law enforcement at both of those locations. Fair to say that the incident command post is going to have the highest ranking, but you really need management types or supervisory types at staging as well. Fair to say. So
what I think I missed it definitely, is accountability. All of these events are accountability nightmares because they send out the report, we have an active shooter, we have some kind of catastrophe, and everybody comes. And I'm not going to get in the argument about self-deploying and all that, because you know what, if I hear my neighbor yelling for help, I'm going to go over and help him. So and Jim will too, and so will Kevin. So accountability, the fire service again is subject matter experts in the area of accountability. Law enforcement is no good at it, let's face it. But if I'm standing there and I make a choke point as you approach the scene with barrier tape or fire trucks or police cars and say, you know, Officer Kevin, give me your badge or your wallet or something as you go by me, so I know who's in there. And law enforcement is not really trained in accountability practices. If they are, they, you know, it was a short class.
Right.
Fire service-
Again, if I'm a law enforcement commander at the scene, I'd be more than happy to let fire take over the accountability piece, and perhaps even the staging piece.
Exactly.
Because at an active shooter or Boston Marathon bombing, law enforcement, well, everyone's going to be pretty busy, but taking down the shooter during the stop the killing phase, law enforcement's going to be very, very busy during that phase. And while that's going on, fire and EMS can certainly step in and contribute their expertise vis-a-vis staging.
Well, Kevin,
setting a command post up.
Yeah, something I would add too is, so we had a high school shooting here in our county, specifically in the community of Oxford, Michigan, just prior to the beginning of the year, and it was actually a lieutenant from the sheriff's office who was the incident commander from start to finish on that incident. Now we have a sheriff, we have an undersheriff, we have majors, we have captains, and then we have lieutenants within our sheriff's office. And everyone that showed up that outranked that lieutenant recognized the outstanding job that he was doing and just facilitated it. At times they would be an angel on his shoulder and maybe provide him with some high level, consultation and opinions and such. But more than anything else, they were keeping people out of his way and allowing him to do what he does, because he's a road supervisor. Right. He's the person that does it every day within that community. And fire chiefs do the same thing. If they've got let's say a battalion chief or a shift supervisor who manages incidents day in and day out, who better to manage that major incident than them? And then again, that fire chief and that police chief or sheriff is available to them to provide whatever expertise or resources they can. But the culture within public safety has evolved in recent years to basically allow for that, where the assumption is no longer the highest ranking person must take command.
Right.
Right on.
Experience and task specialization, very important things for sure. And we've seen that time and again in a lot of these incidents.
I also wanted to say one more other point too that was just brilliant too, is that as Jim said, the casualty collection points, they occur organically. If the bus crashes, people are going to find a hole in the bus and crawl out of the bus. There's where you collect casualties. Running out of the airport terminal onto the tarmac, chase them over there. That's what it's going to happen organically, and
right.
Facilitate it.
And Kevin, looking at your diagram, I just wanted to offer something else too. And that is something that we're now advocating for is as it relates to the TARPs that fire and EMS have traditionally used, the triage treatment and transportation areas that they set up. We've now gotten to the point where we're saying that's the last option, not the first option. So really, you could argue that plan A is to move that victim from point of injury, whether you find them inside or outside. Obviously, you want to do some blood stopping and get them into the back of a transportation asset as quickly as possible with no stops in between. So plan A would be to, you find them in a room within the environment. You stop the life-threatening external bleeding, push them out an exterior door and throw them in an ambulance. And whether they go to the hospital by themselves or with two other victims, that depends on the circumstances.
Right.
Plan B might be to establish some casualty collection points or relay stations, because it's a little bit of a long haul from where you found them to where ultimately the ambulances are going to be. And then the third option would be the TARPs. But unfortunately, over the years, we've had many people languish unnecessarily on the TARPs when we've got ambulances on the runway fueled up and ready to go.
Right. I totally agree. I understand the TARPs and the tags, but I also understand time. And number one on that list is time. We got to get these people to definitive care. They got to get to the operating room. And if we have time for tags and tarps, that's great. But people sort of revert to that as, oh, we have to do that. And the truth is, like you say, you don't. You can do it, but you don't have to do it. What you have to do is get them to the hospital.
Well, and you know, it's hard to believe, but there are people out there that are more arrogant than us, and they're called trauma surgeons.
Yeah.
But they're very good at what they do.
Thank God
And
they don't have I don't want to be operated on by somebody with an inferiority complex.
but at the end of the day, they're like, you know, plug the leaks and get them to us.
That's right. Like they
And you know, so EMS has really come full circle in that regard when it speaks to trauma management.
Right, exactly. So casualty collection points, obviously important, the benefit of which, you know, you can consolidate the efforts, you can speed up triage, speed up indirect threat care. And like Bernie, like you said, they might just occur spontaneously, but if they don't, there's a lot of other concerns. Of course, it has to be a secure location. It's going to depend largely upon the number of casualties. In Vegas, that would prove that you need probably more than one casualty collection point. And you also need access to casualty exchange points where you can get them on the ambulances. There's so much involved. So, you know, we can't prescribe a remedy today. We can just encourage people to think about these things. And that's really the purpose today, is to not telling anyone how to do their business, but just to encourage people to give these important things some thought. And more often than not, or not more often than not, that's not fair, but we don't always see that because, you know, people are busy. And
I think another point to be made, at least with your screen here, with your slide, is that incident command post needs to be in contact, especially if you're a rural area with one hospital. Talk to the hospital early. Again, that organic casualty exchange or whatever is going to spill towards your hospital. As Jim pointed out, Aurora, Colorado, if EMS can't meet the need for transport, it's going to happen one way or the other. In Aurora, it was the police cars. So if you're a mile or two from the hospital, or even a couple miles, people are going to call Uber and get to the hospital. And I think I had made a note here to present that one of the things we've done in the last 15, 20 years now is these hospitals have geared up for security reasons. So you can't overrun a hospital anymore without substantial force. You know, the doors lock, everything can push a button, every door in a hospital locks. Police departments are trained to respond to the hospital. So the hospital is a large part of this equation, that the command post has to be in contact with either the hospital, joint hospital system, or CMED, to tell the hospitals, hey, you know, lock it up and get ready, because here comes a wave of people.
That's right. That's
Well,
right.
Bernie, on that note, one of the things that we're doing here in Michigan, and we're preaching everywhere we go, are hospital task forces, and that is sending mutual aid companies from fire departments that aren't needed on the scene to the hospital to shore them up and help them with their external triage and their command and control. Imagine the power of having, let's say, a captain or two in charge of engine companies show up at that ambulance entrance and provide that nurse or physician who's drowning outside with some command and control and organization, help them with their external triage, help with the blood stopping on the patients that self-transport. And then the Michigan State Police is willingly taking on that mission from a law enforcement standpoint. So when they know that a hospital, particularly a trauma center, is getting crushed by the influx of casualties, they might send a dozen troopers and a supervisor and maybe even a canine to shore up that hospital security, that hospital police force as well.
All good points, all very good points. I have to be mindful of time, so we're halfway through our session. We're going to have to move along, but final thought on casualty collection points and staging. You can tell me that if this is true or untrue, or fair or unfair. The role of triage officer, transport officer. My opinion is there's not a lot of proficiency out there in the world for these positions. Is that fair or unfair?
I think the positions are defined. I think that those people functioning within austere environments or environments that are a little bit less comfortable than another mass casualty situation may allow. I think there's the rub. And also we don't, we'll take Jane Does and John Does to the hospital all the time because there's going to be a number of investigators that will go to the hospital and ultimately identify those people and fill in those gaps. But we don't want to slow down their transportation because we're lacking certain information on them.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. That's
The only thing I would add there is you do have in many places a disparity in experience and medical care ability. So if you're in a rural area with a bunch of basic EMTs and maybe they don't have a lot of experience and you're faced with triage decisions that maybe the first in paramedic that gets there from a distant area might be able to say, no, leave that one. That's a black tag. That's a tough call for somebody who's never made it before.
very tough. Very tough.
While I think most of these early triage modalities from way back might be getting a little bit long in the tooth, there's still a place for a triage master at certain places because of the lack of experience maybe of the BLS responders or even police officers or firefighters that are trying to do an EMS role that they're really not well versed in because they're just first responders and this is a mass casualty thing.
Kevin, I would just add one thing. I know you need to move on, but I think that the pivot point on everything that we're talking about is trust. And, fire and EMS, they will ask law enforcement, is it safe for us to enter that environment?
Right.
At the Pulse nightclub, is it safe for us to go to those casualty collection points that those officers and deputies set up? And the answer that we now have to accept from law enforcement is it's safe enough.
Safe enough. I couldn't agree with you more. Excuse me. And I was going to just circle back to Rescue Task Force and Warm Zone patient care for just a moment. I'm very glad you brought that up. I completely agree. So I'll ask a question then to both of you. The concept of indirect threat care, warm zone care, rescue task force, it hasn't taken root in all jurisdictions across the US yet. In your opinion, and we have about 30 seconds before we have to move on, is rescue task force going to take root coast to coast anytime soon, or do you still see a lot of resistance?
Well, I would just say that fire and EMS are not going to enter that environment until unified command feels comfortable with where the hot zone ends and where the warm zone begins.
Clearly important. Right? Yeah, we're talking warm zone, not hot zone for sure.
Right. So until that determination is made, then obviously fire and EMS aren't going to go in there. I think that if fire and EMS trust law enforcement when they say that it's safe enough to operate within a certain area, and I say it's no different than responding to a reported stabbing in a bar on a Friday night. Fire and EMS stage, law enforcement say, okay, we own the bar. It's safe enough for you to come in and do what you do. And fire EMS doesn't think twice about it. This is exactly the same thing, but on a larger scale.
I think responders are going to do what responders do. They're going to react. And there are going to be places that are going to have organized rescue task forces with ballistic equipment and that sort of thing. And then you're going to go to other places where, I listen to the Buffalo tapes. I'm pretty sure that first fire station's 500 feet away, pulled up with no ballistic equipment on, and they did what they had to do. Trust, as Jim says, 100%. The police department I work with every day, if they told me, come with me, I'm going with them, and then send my guys with them. So I think it's how you look at it, whether it's an organized rescue task force or a couple of guys or people responding in with law enforcement and doing what they need to do.
All right. Well, we could talk about that all day long, but most of my attendees have to sign off in 20-25 minutes. So we're going to keep on moving. I do want to touch upon the other half of our session today, and that is of triage, of course. So we're just going to, this is not a triage class by any means. I just want to touch upon some of the basics. So I have a slide up for STAR triage. The next slide will be on SOLT. We're gonna just kind of race through them, unfortunately, but I'd be remiss if I don't address them. So both START and SOLT triage, they're put together by people a lot smarter than me, and they're common forms of triage, and they're widely recognized. I do believe that they're a great academic foundation for learning how to assess MCI victims, especially in large numbers. My concern, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is while they're a great academic foundation, they are the essential starting point when you're actually at the crisis site and there are dozens and dozens of victims, say in Vegas or Pulse or Virginia Tech. Can responders really do algorithms in their head inside of that scene? And I can only answer that personally. I know that I probably could not. So, but I still have a duty to act, as do all responders. So in my own head, I've come up with my own methods. But can we do algorithms, or can an average EMT be expected to do algorithms in the Pulse nightclub?
I would say not. I mean, I think algorithms and triage cards are two different things. I'm sure the three of us could probably do an algorithm for triage in our head in live time at an incident. If you could stay on this slide, this is an interesting one. I could say, everybody that can walk, go over there. Okay, that's the first triage move. Great. Hey, officer, drag this guy over to that ambulance right now. There's another triage decision I made. The problem becomes is the elementary use of these tags. We don't have time to do these tags. And regardless of what system you use, until the system slows to the point where we can start to process it, either in the rear triage area, treatment area, or in the case of the incident I've been at, where it's a mass fatality, and by that you can slow it way down to use these tags, which we actually did use these smart tags in Sandy Hook to catalog the casualties at a very slow pace. But are all the jurisdictions trained up on START or SMART or SALT or whatever? And if one says they're using something else, it doesn't match with yours. So, I think we could triage, but I don't know as if we can use the program effectively, because the hospital probably isn't up to speed with whatever system people are using necessarily. And I mean, that's my personal opinion. Jim, I'm sure, has a great one as well.
I once again agree with my AOL brother from another mother, Bernie. We both have AOL accounts. We were making fun of that earlier, but no, I agree 100%. I think that START and SALT and other systems out there all get the job done. That's the first, because you'll have people that have very spirited debates about that. They both will solve the problem. And I've utilized both. And I will say that I do prefer SALT for one of the reasons Bernie mentioned, and that was the global sorting. So SALT actually has 2 degrees of global sorting. Hey, if you can get up and move, go ahead and do that now, which incidentally should be a law enforcement command and not a fire EMS command on these types of incidents, because we don't want, as law enforcement is providing force protection, we don't want 10 or 15 people to suddenly stand up and start moving. That's going to give our law enforcement partners some seizures. But SALT has everybody stand up and move. And then their second layer of sorting is, if you can wave, go ahead and wave. And people that were incapable of either moving or waving are the ones that get your attention first. We're big believers in triage tape, which is essentially colored survey tape, that we feel it's reasonable to wrap their wrist or ankle with some colored triage tape. Because again, if 75% of the victims are being moved by law enforcement, we want them to see who's wearing red tape versus who's wearing black tape or black and white striped tape. But I agree. Another reason I like SALT is that it puts a little bit more emphasis on treating as you go than START did. But START was arguably like the first generation, and people had a long time to think about improving upon START, and they've since come out with SALT. But for the listeners or the viewers that are using START, you're not at a disadvantage. That's going to get the job done too.
What I like about SALT, and you kind of touched on this already, is step one, and I have it up on the screen. You're talking about global sorting, and that is a great way to get things started, because right off the bat, you're going to get your reds, yellows, and greens pretty much right away.
We call it thinning. We call it thinning the herd.
Yes, exactly, and you can do that very, very quickly. So and it also tells you who to assess first, second, and third. Anyone still, obviously, you're going to assess first. If they can give you a purposeful movement, like a wave or something, that would be second. And then, of course, if they can walk, third. So there you go. You have your reds, yellows, and green.
Kevin, when it comes to marking casualties, there's two things I do want to mention. I know that there are some regions throughout the country that will position casualties in what's known as the angel position. So they will position their arms and legs in an unorthodox manner to represent to anyone else who comes along that is an obviously deceased person. We feel that the tape is more reliable than any repositioning of the body. Obviously, there's some evidentiary concerns with the investigators as well. And then one other thing I want to mention is, for years, we were advocating for the use of chem lights or chem sticks to mark casualties, especially in low light environments. But after some conversations with bomb techs, we are no longer doing that, because bomb techs everywhere in the United States use chem lights or chem sticks to mark devices. And in a situation where there might be some IEDs involved, and you don't want that kind of moving through the environment, and they see those chem lights, they're all going to stroke out when they see us throwing them out there.
And the single point of failure to any of these systems is the fact that if law enforcement or the fire service or mutual aid or whoever isn't trained up to the system that the first in EMS system is running, it's going to fail. We carry the tape, the bags with the tape in it, as Jim portrayed. It's easy. The UPS guy can look at a victim and go, it's green, I guess he's okay. Red must be worse. You know? So I think that is something you have to consider, that if you don't have a countywide system, fire system, EMS system, law enforcement, state police, that are all trained up. I mean, I don't know if any law enforcement trains up in MCI programs. Most fire services, okay, we'll breeze over it in the EMT recert once every 3 years, maybe. But I think that is the inherent failure point of a triage system, if you will. Connecticut did smart tag, and they bought a great big kit for each ambulance and smaller kits for fire trucks and so forth. Well, if your ambulance isn't there and you don't have the kit, and the chief officer can't find his little kit, well, again, it's another point of failure. So, but it's very important to train people to triage victims. And again, with the turnover of EMS people, my personal opinion, having been in EMS a long time, and I live in a very small town and I work in a larger city. If you have a newer EMS person, whether it's a EMR or EMT, they're not accustomed to making life or death triage decisions. You know, Bernie or Jim, paramedic for God knows how many years. Okay, we made that decision. It's a little bit easier for us, but you have to consider the response crew.
Right. Sure, exactly.
Kevin, Bernie really hit the nail on the head with the need for a regional culture. So I'll give you a perfect example. In my county, I've got 1.3 million people, and I don't have a community larger than 85,000 people, which means when a critical incident occurs, we're going to need our neighbors and they're going to need us.
Sure.
And if each one of those 40 communities are on their own program, when it comes to mass casualty response, it's going to be an epic failure.
It's going to be an epic failure for sure. So regardless of the system that jurisdictions use, they should train to it. They should know it. They should be able to share it with their neighbors. Everyone's got to be on the same sheet. So I do like the step on the global sorting that you mentioned, Jim. If I had any trouble at all with SALT, I look at the algorithm, I look at the diagram, particularly in the lower portion, the lower right portion, and The only concern I would have is this is asking me, the average EMT basic, to do a lot. It's asking me to make a decision whether they are likely to survive or not, and whether or not their injuries are minimum or not. And this is after doing the life-saving interventions, after doing an assessment, and maybe I'm still only on the REDS, the assessments for REDS, and I'm already out of breath. I'm already tired. This is asking me to do a lot. And I can speak for myself, and I just don't know that I personally could do it.
And think about, Kevin, for a minute, think about your daily programming where you're from. You have a tiered EMS response system. EMTs, MRTs or EMRs are trained to get the person a higher level of care. So on a day-to-day basis, that decision isn't always made by you. Your decision is get the ALS guy here. And then if you
right.
You're overrun with casualties, and now the EMTs cannot hand the person over to the paramedic. Again, that's a decision that's not exercised in your day-to-day operation.
Yeah, it's asking a lot. It is.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Kevin. And one thing that I teach people is that sure, they can memorize this algorithm and maybe recall 10% of it under duress. But really what it comes down to is, are they talking? Are they walking?
Right.
Are they talking? Are they walking? Are they leaking?
Right.
And based on those three criteria, then let common sense take over.
Right. Exactly.
Whether you're a EMR or a paramedic, you'll more times than not, you'll know what you need to do with that person.
Right. You're hitting upon one of the points that I really was the goal today, was to hit upon, is keep it simple, go fast, keep it simple. Well, not necessarily go fast, but keep it simple. And basically, are they messed up, or are they really messed up? And then make that call, and then go on to the next patient, go on to the next victim. And then ask yourself again, are they messed up, or are they really messed up? Because in my mind, that's all I'm going to be able to do if there's 6 victims laying on the floor like there was in the Pulse nightclub. There's nothing more you can do than just to do a rapid 10-second peek at somebody and determine whether or not they're alive and they need to go right now.
Well, and that trust that we referred to earlier goes both ways. So when law enforcement says it's safe enough, we need to take them at their word. When fire and EMS say there's nothing we can do for that child, law enforcement needs to take us at our word and move on to the next objective.
Yes, couldn't agree more. So I very quickly, excuse me, I circled back to START for a minute. We all recognize that, excuse me, the benefits of both SALT and START. START is simple triage and rapid transport, and it is in fact simple, so I do like that, but it's not without its challenges as well. Of course, we go through respirations, we go through checking perfusion, and then we're going to check mental status. Just very quickly for me, I'm sort of inclined to put mental status closer to the top of things that you check. But anyway, as we go through this algorithm, the things, again, it's a good one, but where I would run into some questions would be when you're checking respirations, in this case, you're looking for respirations over 30, but it doesn't really address respirations at 7 or 8. If somebody's breathing 7 times a minute, that to me is a red. That's an immediate as well. When it comes to pulse checks, checking perfusion, I don't know. Can you really check for pulses in the Pulse nightclub? I don't know. It's dark. What if it's raining outside?
Actually, there were law enforcement officers inside Pulse checking pulses, literally.
Or counting respirations, Kevin, if you will. I mean,
there's a time penalty in counting respirations and checking for pulses, especially if you have to triage 60, 70 people. You're eating up a lot of time. Again, it works. I'm just sort of playing devil's advocate here.
Is a good answer.
Well, and one thing I want to offer too is I agree with you as far as you want to conserve time everywhere you can. But another thing too is that if and when you get, let's say, a rescue task force in there, or even you get law enforcement officers in there that have been trained in stop the bleed, you want to keep them forward deployed. You want them to touch as many vehicles or as many victims as they can to buy more time. So touch as many victims as you can, stop the bleeding on as many victims as you can. Then you'll buy yourself more time to make those extraction and treatment decisions.
Right. Good point. Very good point. So anyway, just some things to think about. We got about 10 minutes left. I would like to squeeze in, we covered an awful lot of material, very good material, very quickly, but we have a large audience. I would like to see if there's any questions and answers that we can turn to at this time. So if you have a question, I'm going to have you raise your hand and then we can unmute you. This is a good opportunity to ask questions of some highly experienced individuals. Bryce, do you see anyone raising their hand? All right, we're going to keep monitoring for hand raising if we have any over the next few minutes. I'm just going to go back to START to see if we have anything left to discuss about START, since we might actually have a minute or two.
Kevin, I think one thing maybe we should emphasize too. We talked about it, but maybe we need to emphasize the training portion of it. We talked about command and incident command system. The best thing we could do to control any of these incidents, to mitigate them, is to train up our EMS and law enforcement partners into the incident command system. They all get a rudimentary, basic ICS 101 or 100 for that matter. And if we could go ahead every year or every other year and do in-services with, EMS doesn't really get any ICS training other than if you do the online NIMS 100 or whatever. Law enforcement gets, an hour or two of it. They understand it, but they don't practice it too often. But if the fire service can emphasize in a jurisdiction or your area to say, okay, you know what, let's just get on the same page. I go crazy when I hear 3 or 4 different people claiming command, and it is, if I hear EMS command, there's no such thing, it's command.
Right.
So learn how to work those systems so that it's not a foreign language to you when you show up and you're assigned to accountability or staging or operations or rescue task force, and understand that everybody needs a boss and there needs to be, divisions and groups. That the issue with EMS especially is we have such turnover recently that there's very few veterans left, veteran EMS workers. We get somebody that takes the EMT class, they work for a year or two, and they said, I'm going to be a nurse or paramedic or cop, fireman. So I think we need to try to back up a little bit and train up our allied partners.
I think that's a great point you make. The more training, the better. The more realistic exercising, the better. Incident command is both an art and a science, and people need to appreciate that and try to build that into their toolkit, their capabilities. Kevin, you got a question?
Yeah, Kevin, as we get ready to close out, there's just a couple of things that I wanted to mention that are on topic but off topic at the same time, and that is where some of us feel these types of incidents are going. So, Bernie and I are both a bit seasoned. We've been around for a while, and I'm sure some of the participants on the call are as well. And they may remember when these incidents were referred to as going postal. And then Columbine High School occurred, and they became school shootings. Now we're seeing a disturbing uptick or increase in the number of open air incidents. So for years, people have been training inside the school. They might want to think about training for something bad happening at a high school football game or a parade or a festival, because we're seeing more and more of that. And as melodramatic as it may sound, evil loves the darkness, and the darkness creates certain tactical advantages for these offenders. Right. So we train during the day, but more and more of these incidents are occurring at night.
Yeah, we have to be ready for to respond to these things in all types of weather and in the daytime and the night, inside and out. You're absolutely right. It's our adversaries are getting very creative,
and which they're also getting more cowardly, in the sense that what you saw this weekend is going to continue to play out. More and more of them are wanting to survive. So they can wait years to have their day in court and get their 3 square meals a day for the rest of their lives afterwards, and continue to not only inspire future offenders, but continue to traumatize the community.
Yeah, right. Exactly. They no longer seem to have the dignity to at least off themselves after their dastardly act. We had a question from Keith. Keith, I don't know if you're still on.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead with your question, Keith.
Yeah, hi. I'm actually part of a hospital system in upstate New York. I'm a safety officer. I also oversee safety and security services and other departments. And I'm also part of our auxiliary police for the county, which is part of the emergency preparedness department for the county. And I just wanted to mention, one, that our hospital does use those triage tags. So we drill and train with those triage tags. So if they did come from a mass casualty standpoint to our hospital, we would recognize those tags. We still utilize those tags in those situations, especially if we don't have bed placement or areas where we would be able to put some of those patients in, especially if we're getting a large amount, we would need to designate, what type of care they would receive. So we are utilizing those. And then just wanted to mention, since you brought up training, one thing I think that we need to really work on, as far as in my area, is really working with our local partners, including the hospital, as far as drilling and training, because a lot of times we do training and drills, amongst ourselves as the hospital, but not really working with our county and state partners. I mean, we are required by law for a hospital to do a drill annually, but COVID obviously has impacted that greatly. But a lot of our issues that we receive is really kind of how we're going to handle situations when you have a incident command at a mass casualty site and then an incident command at the receiving site, which is the hospital. And I think if we can have a lot more training to kind of partner I think it's really going to help a lot, because we do the same thing that you guys are doing out in the community as far as incident command structure and training. We go through the same trainings. And I think if we can do a lot more together, I think it's going to benefit both parties. We had a drill that was down at the college about a mile from here. They did an active shooter drill, and we were not included in that drill. And that was one thing that I spoke to him about. Well, once you, kind of determine what, level of care people will need, and once you start transporting them, or once they start coming themselves, what is the hospital going to do? So moving forward, hopefully we'll be able to have the hospital included. But, I think it's definitely a good idea to have both entities involved in these drills, because, it's really going to make, better for both parties.
Keith, I'm so glad you mentioned the hospital piece, because that is absolutely critical here, because triage in the pre-hospital phase is different than the triage that's going to occur through the doors of the emergency department. So the pre-hospital and the hospital do need to understand how each other triage and what's an immediate in the field may not be an immediate in the emergency department, and vice versa. So there needs to be more communication there. Jim, you want to weigh in there?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Number one, I agree completely with what was just said, and that was the importance of collaboration between the hospitals and emergency responders. I would also say, whenever possible, unified command on the scene should send a command liaison or a PIO to the hospital that's hardest hit to start coordinating their messaging. A couple other things I would share on the topic of hospitals is that, number one, we're not going to permit in our region, we don't permit our responders to cross the threshold into the emergency department. That trauma center, that emergency center has to be prepared to receive those casualties, because we know once a crew goes inside, we're going to lose them. We're not going to get them back for a period of time. So we're literally, we've told the hospitals, be prepared to receive them on your doorstep, because we need to recycle those crews to get them back. And the last thing I'll say on the hospitals is, if your region has a level 1 trauma center, don't assume that your level 1 is always going to do the heavy lifting. Look at what happened in Las Vegas. You had a transient population that didn't know the difference between a level 1 and a level 2. Most of them lived out of town, and they went to the closest hospital, which was Sunrise Medical Center, a level 2, which did a tremendous job.
Right.
But all trauma centers need to be prepared to take the brunt of this.
Right. For those who don't know, the Sunrise out in Vegas had 215 patients come through their door in under 1 hour. So like you said, Jim, hospitals need to be ready for anything because these events are getting larger and larger and more serious. So great points on the hospital piece. I'm so glad we brought that up. We just hit 2:00, but I'm going to encourage people to just give us another 2 or 3 minutes here. I want to give closing arguments to both of our speakers and just do one final check of our audience to see if there's any questions remaining out there. If not, Jim, why don't you give us your closing arguments, and we'll still monitor the chat for any questions.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we want to continue to foster collaboration between all the stakeholders. So law enforcement, fire, EMS, emergency management, the hospitals, appointed and elected officials need to have an understanding of what this is all about. And just to share a couple of nuggets with you, just from my travels and locally, one of the things that we've done in our county is we put a flexible litter in every law enforcement vehicle in our county, which acts as a force multiplier when it comes to casualty movement. Because law enforcement, we found, moves 75% of the casualties. We want to further empower them to do that by putting a flexible litter in each car. So that officer shows up on the scene, they've got a patrol rifle, they've got their individual first aid kit, and maybe they've got a flexible litter, and they may end up using any one of those tools. And the other thing I'll mention is the other thing I'll mention is specifically from our high school incident at the end of last year. Many public buildings and businesses may have their exterior doors numbered, but the majority of them are just numbered on the outside and not the inside. So when emergency responders are inside the environment, such as a school, and they're trying to communicate with command, they're trying to communicate with the perimeter where they specifically are within the building, we don't want them to have to walk outside and look at the outside of the door.
That is a great
location.
That is a great point. So
that's something that we learned the hard way, and we're already endeavoring to address.
Great point. And if there's any law enforcement on the session today, I hope you can implement that in your own or academics for that matter. If you can institute that in your jurisdictions, that would be a very positive step forward. Thank you for that, Jim. Chief Meehan, closing arguments to you, sir.
I can't agree with Jim more. I think the last 15, 20 years has gave us more reason in different disciplines to work with each other. And we have no choice now. When I first started this journey, I was a fire guy, I was an EMS guy, and even those two silos were separate. And now those are basically one silo. Law enforcement and the fire service and EMS has come way close together, as well as the emergency department and emergency management and all that. We're really working together quite well, at least out here in Connecticut, most places. And I think that's to continue. The school thing, that's a great piece of advice. I think we've come a long way with that. Windows are numbered, doors are numbered. I like to see school administrators have maybe a white lanyard on their card, so that's a command level person from the school. You have SROs embedded in schools that could be the RTF guide into some of these places. You have to think outside the box, and I don't think we're anywhere near done with designing where we're heading. I think we're chasing a moving target, as Jim pointed out. Now it's all of a sudden open air things. Schools were the target of choice. And now the movie theaters and shopping centers, and now supermarkets. None of it makes any sense. And it just leads us to more questions. We don't have the answers. But I'm glad people signed on. Thank you for listening.
Yeah,
it was a great opportunity to talk with you again, Kevin. So
yeah, it's been, we first met 6 years ago. For those, for anyone interested, Bernie and I first met when I hosted a seminar at my previous place of employment some 6 years ago. So we've been Facebook buddies ever since. So optimizing response is clearly a work in progress, and but it's a noble obligation, and I think we're all committed to that. And gentlemen, I do very, very much appreciate your time. This is incredibly valuable. We went a little over an hour. The truth is, we really needed 2 or 3 hours today, I think, to cover everything. But I hope we got just a few pearls of wisdom out there, and maybe we encourage people to start the wheels turning and think about some of this stuff. So again, I do thank you for your time. I thank everyone else on the call too for tuning in. We went 5 minutes over. I do apologize for that, but I hope it was worth your while. And I hope you all stay safe and healthy out there.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you again to everybody. Great session. Thank you.
Bernie, I'll reach out to you on AOL.
Have a great day, everybody.